for all of the gasping out of the years involved, the 61-year plan, for example, the numbers behind that, 39.2 billion, it sounds enormous, and I understand why that's the lead. Yeah, I have some sympathy with the MPs making this decision because there is quite a lot to consider within this. Let's keep an eye on how this one develops.
I mean, the work's not supposed to start until about 2030, I don't think. You'd like to think we've got a bit of time, but we probably haven't. 4 years
No.
isn't that long when you're talking about the scale of work that this entails. And I completely understand what you're saying wholeheartedly, but you run the risk of this being an ongoing project. Near the start of the article, they actually mention the timescale is only 15 years off the time which elapsed since the last renovation completed in 1950. So if we imply that, by the time this work finishes, we'll have to start it all over again.
Peter, episode 104. How do we find ourselves this week?
Yeah, we're 4 over the ton, aren't we? If we're cricketers, we'd be flying high at the moment, you know. I don't know where that analogy came from, but we're sticking with it. Eh? All good, all good. Really interesting topics to talk about today. As always, positivity, bit of disruption in more than one way. But how are you doing?
I'm good. Well, I wanted to I would start off with this week on a bit of an apology to the listeners, actually, in that we've been very, very clear in our remit on this in terms of format on 3 headlines, 2 opinions, 1 takeaway. We've kind of got a bit of a double whammy in the first item this week, which probably takes it to 4 headlines, strictly speaking. Well, we can caveat under 1, which is, again, the other part of our remit is to try and look behind the headlines and find the positive stuff. And the reason that we've got 4 is that we've got quite a bit of positive news this week. I think sometimes in trying to find it, we scrape the bottom of the barrel to such an extent that we splinter our hands. And yeah, not the case. Not the case this time around. There seems to be some. The sun is shining, and yeah, I think it seems to be some meaningful green shoots of recovery within sector, and at the part of the supply chain where, yeah, logic dictates that hopefully there's some better news coming for the rest of the supply chain as well. So, should we dive straight in while we've got some good news?
I think we should. Yeah,
Right,
go for it.
Well, I'll kick us off. So there's a twofer this week in Construction Inquirer, which is the reason that we've got 2 news items within the first headline, both about recovery within sector. So the first comes from a study by the cost consultant Gardner and Theobald, and they've revised up their tender price inflation forecast for the year from 2.5% to 3%. Doesn't sound that exciting on the face of it, but when you look at the underlying reasons for why that revision's taken place and sort of what they're seeing, is because there's a lot of projects that were sort of at a very early planning stage back end of last year that were paused for viability reasons, for affordability reasons, for everything else. And rather than those being completely scrapped, they were genuine pauses that now viability looks to be sort of hitting a point where those things can start. So no new demand, which may be a slight disappointment to some. But I think the idea of cost resiliency and these legacy schemes becoming viable, I think is a really, really positive thing. There was 1 quote in particular that stuck out with me within the Construction Inquirer piece. Contractors surveyed by the cost consultant say projects parked at the end of 2025 are re-emerging, particularly in residential and mixed-use sectors, which everything we've discussed in the last couple of weeks, Pete, on that kind of being a lag on the rest of the construction sector. So those bits in particular now starting to improve. Hopefully, if the rest can continue, the non-resi and the infrastructure stuff, then we'll be in a really good spot. And yeah, where Building Safety Act Gateway 2 delays had become a critical bottleneck, that's where they're also seeing things slacken up. So tying in very, very nicely with bits that we've discussed last week. Approval timelines are shortening and conversations around funding and appraisal are beginning to move again. So yeah, there's lots of encouraging stuff there. As I say, I think that particularly the fact that there's some good news coming out of resi, because that absolutely hasn't been the case. We've, as much as anyone else, we've been talking about 1.5 million homes, but the actual practicalities of that now starting to see movement, I think is he's really, really encouraging. I don't know what you make of that one.
There was 2 bits that stood out to me. The first one is that you've got to see it as a positive, because in the article, another quote talks about market challenges still persisting. including planning delays, regulatory pressures, intense fee competition. And even though we've still got those and forever probably will have those, and if they're not those, there'll be other challenges, we're still seeing that positive uplift.
Yeah,
The other part of it for me is that in this report, they said that one of the most important parts of it is that there's little evidence of widespread price cutting. So what that highlights is that projects were delayed or put on pause, whatever it might have been at the back end of 25, but they're not starting up again because they found contractors that'll do things for less, cheaper, imports, whatever it might be, to facilitate these projects at a reduced fee. That they're maintaining that price, which again helps with margins, which again helps with tier one, tier two contractors, and that trickle down effect. So I think that is fundamentally a huge positive, regardless of how much of a small increase it might sound.
completely agree. And it ties in again with several stories that we've looked at in recent weeks and months. I'm thinking back to the lack of housing starts in London and the potential for in fact, it was the mayor's recommendation, wasn't it, to reduce the thresholds on affordable.
Mm.
A big part of that was that things just weren't hitting requisite value in order to entice end clients into marketing for people to part with cash. So as you say, that there's a really good sign there that people aren't, it's not a race to the bottom from a discounting point of view. It's that things are just hitting a point of value where where these things seem worthwhile endeavors in their own right. People aren't undercutting each other. Again, tying in with the story of it was very specific to MEP contractors within data
Yeah.
centers. But it's one of the things with labor shortage, isn't it? That you would think that that's going to, from a salary point of view and everything else, that's going to hold value. So, yeah, there's a lot to be excited about there. And I think in lockstep with that, and it feels again that there's a lot of parity and similarity with looking at the ONS data that we did on back end of last year, where things just starting to pardon me, sorry, and the S&P data, where after 11 months of decline as part of that survey, just starting to turn a corner now and things looking a bit more positive. One of the ones that I keep an eye on anyway is the RIBA Future Trends survey, which is a survey of RIBA registered architects, just to take a pulse on sort of how confident that they feel about various different aspects connected to the role of the architect. For the last 4 months to the latest survey, their confidence levels on new workload had been in decline, and that has now
Mm.
bucked the trend. So I guess the second part of this that's a positive is that their future trends survey had a what they call a +3 on their workload index. So 0 would be kind of no improvement, so just kind of where we are where we are. So there's been a real turnaround in that respect, which is massive. Then jumping back to the previous Gardner and Theobald piece, and I guess it's true for both. We'd spoken about so with some cynicism, I guess, that a lot of what we were seeing from a broader trends point of view felt copy and paste from last year. This might be the year for sort of slow, steady growth, but don't worry, guys, it's really going to take off. Actually, they're saying a very, very similar kind of a thing here. So there's again, for a layperson like me looking at this, there are so many data points that seem to be overlapping and aligning quite closely that gives me a bit more confidence that this isn't. There's not one report that feels like the outlier at the minute. Everything
Mm.
feels like it's pretty consistent. There's a comment in there that the first half of this year is about bid development. It's
Mhm.
about getting those projects ready and getting them ready to move. And obviously that aligns with things like just Gateway 2 and 3 improvements and so on. But there are strong delivery conditions forecast for the second half of this year moving into 27 when you're going to see those bigger uplifts in output. So I would say at the minute, if you follow things like the golden thread, for instance, or just like a logical sort of scope of works, we've got the consultants, we've got the contractors in previous surveys, and we've got the architects all saying that they're seeing signs of live improvements to conditions. So for other people in the supply chain, your tier twos, your specialist subcontractors, your merchants, your material, and everyone else that has a role in the supply chain further on, just we've said it before, but hold tight, because within 5-6 months this could really really start to move and could be good news for everyone across the supply chain. Um, apologies, dear listener, in there being two stories within one there, but
Mhm.
hopefully you'll forgive us on the grounds that there really is some good news there on the face of it. So long may that continue, eh?
Mm. And you bang right. No one's got a crystal ball, but there's murmurings in different parts of the industry, roughly. Again, reiterating what you said, roughly saying the same things. And I strongly believe that this all started pretty much when we started this podcast. Really, like it's a bit coincidental that after a couple of months, everyone starts to see positive signs within the industry. I honestly believe the two are related. Deep down, I must admit, I haven't said this, but it's going on record. Yeah, this podcast has a lot to do with major shifts in our industry.
Yeah. Hey, construction, you're welcome.
Open letter to construction.
We'd better move on to the second story pretty quickly before this gets out of hand.
Yeah, but again, moving to this second story, um, it's intrinsically linked to the podcast because this is from construction management. And Dave Stitt, who's been around for over 50 years, which this podcast will end up being, obviously, but he talks about the need to think differently about quality. And if nothing else, that is what this podcast is, a highly produced quality piece of media. So I don't know why you're laughing. So yeah, so this next story from construction management is all about someone that's been around the block in construction and thinking about quality and what that means within the industry. And I'm really keen to get your take on what he's saying about these things and how he's perceiving quality. But I'd advise anyone to take a read of this story because he mentions different books and different theories and different ways of looking at quality, which we'll get into. And the basic premise being that if you care about what you're doing, then quality will shine through. And that isn't an accreditation on a piece of paper. It isn't a skill that is born out of theory or learning things through building and blocks and whatever. It's actually a feeling, I would say, and he goes into that depth in this story about those in this article about those things. So it's a really really different look on our industry. What was your take on this?
I loved it. It's one of those. We've had a few of these in recent weeks, actually, and I think they're a good counterbalance. These first person stories, they're a really good counterbalance to some of the bigger, more stat laden stuff, like the first story and the one we'll look at a little bit later on. Yeah, for all of these big numbers, it's people that tell the truth about their lived experience within the sector and what that actually means in context. And one of the things that really struck with me is, and it's within the opening kind of salvo, is this idea of personal accountability within quality. That we're not talking about, to your point, quality standards or something that's a bit more lofty. Or we've got some gargantuan organisations, but governmental, private businesses, and a mix of both within the construction sector. I think it's very easy on that basis, particularly when you're a sort of an SME provider or a sole trade, to kind of go, that's someone else's problem. It's the one whose name is over the top of the site or whatever else the case may be. This idea of the book stopping with each individual person, and kind of there's a comment in there about sort of quality from an ethical point of view. What is my role on this side? What can I ultimately be responsible for, and how do I want to show up? There was a question. Was it Dave Stitt is the name of the chap? Is a chartered civil engineer that's the author of the piece. There's a question there. What would happen if quality was the first item on our agenda as a management team? For all we talk about units and delivery and financials and various other bits, all important. We've spoken at length several times about the number of things the sector has to be responsible for from a environmental point of view, sort of looking after our people, being commercially productive and profitable and so on. But if we started with quality in all of those conversations, what would quality look like in that context? And what would our businesses look like? What would the sector look like if there was a kind of a domino effect on that basis? I think is a really, really fascinating question. So this idea, personal accountability, but then the accumulative effect of of all of us taking responsibility for that, I think it's a really great article. I echo your sentiment. I highly recommend rather that people go and have a good look at this.
And I think it links back to a lot of things that we've covered, including the first story as well, and providing that quality throughout a build, and making sure you maintain those high standards, you maintain that pricing, you don't cut corners, you don't cut the quality in the materials or the workmanship to match a price. It,
Mm,
you believe in what you do because it is quality, and you should hold on to that cost that you feel is associated with that quality. And he even goes as deep into saying it's an ethical matter, and that's what I was talking about. You can't really learn it in a classroom.
mm.
You can talk about it and start to build those ethics and what you see as ethical, but I think it's built in people, and there's loads of different ways you can see being ethical, and everybody I think is slightly different in their own ethics. But it just it's really refreshing to hear somebody talk about quality rather than price.
Yeah,
And that was the bit that stood out for me, having a bit of a conscience about these things, and doing the right thing essentially is what his basic premise is all about. The book he mentions, and he goes into detail about why, and I won't spoil it for anyone, but it's Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance. And this was actually part of his the course he was doing, and the lecturer presented this book to them early on in the course, and he was unsure why, and after so many years, decades of reading it over and over again, he understands. And I want no spoilers in that one, because I'd rather people read it, because it's a nice piece to read, I think.
mm, mm. No, I'm with you completely. I think again, a quote in there: "Show me a person who cares, and I'll show you quality work." And I think it's again, I'll double back around because it will likely be my takeaway for this week. But something in what you said there that I think absolutely rings true with me. We can't get away from the fact that businesses are in businesses are businesses to turn a profit. That's what they're here to do, and that we have certain elements of the current construction model that it's very very tight margins, and people are looking for margin opportunity. And quality could really be that. I know that's not the point of Dave's piece. It's quality for quality's sake, and there's an inherent ethical, reason to sort of look
Mm.
to produce quality within your work. And I agree with that wholeheartedly. Um, but sometimes the world isn't as you want it to be. You've kind of got to meet people where they are, and I think part of that in construction is about making the commercial case for that. And I think you've hit the nail on the head, Pete. That in sort of standing by the quality of your work, becoming known for it, building brands and businesses on the back of quality, that provides something of a moat for your business on profitability.
Yeah.
Being able to hold firm on margins and being able to show a clear point of difference relative to competition and so on. I think, there's a yin and yang there of quality for quality's sake, but also using that to commercial advantage as well, which I think is a really powerful lesson for the businesses in the sector willing to take it. So you're right, and to echo the sentiment of the article, it might start in the abstract. Reading this book that's quite philosophical and
Mhm.
ethereal. But if you can think laterally and sort of find a way to apply it to your business, I think there's potentially again something really really powerful there. We should all be seeking to sort of provide a quality service, but what does that mean commercially if we're able to sort of demonstrate that and to build a business off the back of that? It's a really interesting one.
He also mentions another read in ethicability. And he says that there are three dominant philosophies within this book, and that's the ethics of obedience, care, and reason.
Mm,
And what he goes on to say is that he fears that we're edging far too closely to ethics of obedience
mm,
in terms of legal rights and duties, and in an industry that is rife for that, and rightly so, for the right reasons. They are there for a purpose. His take is that it can be quite stifling, and
yeah.
it's far too rigid. And again, it's about doing the right thing. And sometimes that thing. And again, if you think about what that means in terms of obedience, it's almost like that is the lowest form, the lowest level. You
Mm.
need to match that to be above the rules and regulations that we have set in this country. And if your work is quality, you don't want to be just above that threshold.
Yeah,
You should be way above it. So
yeah,
I think that's his point, not we should disregard all the laws that have been put around for safety and building regs, et cetera, et cetera. That's not his point. His point being they're there for a reason, but that is like the baseline that we should all conform to regardless.
completely. That was, you took the words out of my mouth. I was going to say it's a really, really great point, and I think it depends on whether you see those rules and regulations as kind of a target to be hit, or whether they are, as you say, that they're a baseline to be achieved, and then we go on from there. But yeah, that quality mindset, and then the ethical side of that, I think is maybe the thing that moves people onto that next stage naturally. So yeah, but please go and have a read of it.
Yeah.
If any part of what we've just rambled on for the last 10 minutes has piqued your interest, then you will get even more out of the article. And yeah, I think you're absolutely right, mate. I've got two more bits for my reading list there as well. So yeah, a worthwhile
Fantastic.
endeavour.
Absolutely. So, third and final headline from building.co.uk. And speaking of quality and ethics, it links quite nicely here. I just want to read the title, and then I'll let you take the lead on this one, because I could go off and one and pop at any moment. To be fair, but the title of this story is, or this headline is, "Could the restoration of Parliament really take 61 years?" That's years.
Well, and based on the article, this could be the shortest item that we've ever done on this podcast. But yes, seemingly is the
And that's a wrap. So,
yes takeaways. Yeah, it's there's an element of facetiousness to this, but only just.
mm,
It's not even one of those articles that we've spoken about in. But it's a part of our MO, isn't it, in getting behind the headlines? But the headlines bang on. So for anyone that hasn't kept up with this particular story, because it's one that, in fairness, has rumbled on for years to this point. Part of the reason that 61 seems absolutely within scope. The Houses of Parliament are in dire need of
mm,
a proper solution from a maintenance point of view. Again, it's a long article that we're referencing here within building, but some of the key poll stats: we're currently spending £1.5 million per week just on maintenance of running repairs, basically of Parliament, and some of the things listed in there are just it's mind blowing. I think
yeah,
it was something in the region of 300 different, or maybe even 400 different complaints per week on a maintenance point of view that are logged. It's
380 minor works.
380. Honestly, it's baffling. So yes, because again, some of the national newspapers will focus on the headline stats around the cost to
Mm,
undertake the complete works, and rightly so. The purpose of our national press is to hold government to account on what they're doing with public funds. However, when you look at the amount that we're spending at the minute just on just maintaining something like the status quo, um, it racks up, doesn't it? Sorry to pull us back to the main story. There, after years of kind of reviewing this, there are four different possible routes that have been laid out to MPs as how big do you want to go, and how efficient do you want to be in overhauling Parliament. They kind of range from MPs in the Lords and Commons staying in place, business as usual, and we'll do the works around you. And now we're saying 61 years. There is one particular route they've looked at that's north of that. It's 81 in total. If you were to go the extreme version of that, um, equally, we move to a temporary Commons and temporary Lords, close down the current sort of Palace of Westminster, and then undertake a pretty aggressive maintenance package to get that done as quickly as possible. That still takes a couple of decades, given the size of the premises, the specialist nature of the sort of labour needed. Again, speaking locally from where I work, there's the Manchester Town Hall that's been several years, and people have kind of bemoaned that, but that's due to
mm,
open again next year. That's
yeah, yeah.
that's what Manchester Council did. They elected to completely close down the building to move staff elsewhere temporarily, so they could focus wholesale on getting that done. We've spoken about labour shortage here. This is just a slight anecdote, but because of the listed nature of that building and the age of it, some of the specialist labour required is so sought after. You're talking about booking people in years in advance in some
Mm.
cases. Um, so yeah, I don't want to kind of diminish this and make it sound like a wasted money kind of a thing. The 61 years is alarming on the face of it, but in a nutshell, 4 routes laid out to Parliament, and the reason that the 61-year one is the one the building have elected to use in the headline is that that's emerged as one of 2 plans that have been judged to be the most viable under kind of consideration. So yeah, I don't know what your thoughts are on this one, Pete. There's a lot about this that blew my mind once I got into the detail of it.
Yeah, it's a long piece, and it goes into there's a lot of numbers and a lot of figures, and they are all astronomical. To or mind blowing to try and think about it and how these come to light and how they work it out. There's one paragraph that I just want to read. It sums up those numbers. So there was a fourth option, but they've poo-pooed this one called continued presence. And it says, despite coming in at a relatively speedy 45 years and attempting and a tempting price tag of just 22 billion, this option was struck off in the client's board's February report, partly because it would require the House of Lords to relocate to the nearby QE2 centre for up to 33 years.
Mm.
Now that's some temporary accommodation that uh, yeah, and then there's loads of reasons why um, this is necessary. 36 fire incidents in 10 years is quite worrying. There's asbestos there. You know, the
Mm.
stone masonry's falling apart, which
Mm.
is absolutely integral, not just for the structural integrity of the building, but for the quality and historical perspective of that. Part of me, there's 2, like, I love history, I love UK history, I love monarchy history, parliamentary, anything like that,
Mm.
well, I love learning about it 'cause it's so fascinating that this happened many years ago, and you can see it in real life, you know? And I get the whole, okay, so what happens to um, the opening of Parliament? What happens to Blackrod knocking on the door like he has done for many years, and thinking, yeah, we need to maintain that history, and rightly so. But another part of me thinks, well, you're going to lose this building if it isn't done correctly,
Yeah.
and surely that is more important for our heritage than it is some of the more elements that are more fanfare. And yes, they are part of our history historically, but putting them on pause, like we did with the Queen Elizabeth Tower and Big Ben not chiming for a while, and look at that now. You know,
Mm.
it's a gleaming pinnacle of what the whole House of Parliament could be.
But
Uh,
and this is sorry to cut, but this is one of the big things that I hadn't appreciated fully within as much as I tend to bring a political article for consideration on this podcast every week. It feels like so. I probably should have considered this, but part of the reason for the expense and the time running and the want for MPs to sort of stay where they are. Yes, there is the pomp and ceremony and history and all that sort of stuff, but I didn't fully appreciate just how much that building plays a role within the democratic process. So it's not
mm,
as simple as other countries, for example, where they have built almost complete cities just to house government and for that to be the sort of governmental center of that country. We can't do that. We can't just move this to Milton Keynes, can we? And sort of build a new structure there and have it done. Things like the division bell and the lobby and
mhm,
the role that functions and so on. It's there's a lot of considerations there. It isn't just find a big enough space to accommodate
yeah,
these people.
yeah,
The building itself plays a role within the way that we create laws and the way that we govern. So yeah, for all of the gasping at the years involved, the 61-year plan, for example, the numbers behind that 39.2 billion. It sounds enormous, and I understand why that's the lead. But yeah, I have some sympathy with the MPs making this decision because there is quite a lot to consider within this. So yeah, let's
yeah.
keep an eye on how this one develops.
I, I mean, the work's not supposed to start until about 2030, I don't think,
Mm.
either. So you'd like to think we've got a bit of time, but we probably haven't. 4 years
No.
isn't that long when you're talking about the scale of work that
Mm.
it entails. And I completely understand what you're saying wholeheartedly, but you run the risk of this being an ongoing project. Near the start of the article, they actually mention something along the lines of, if I can find it really quickly, that it's 15 years. Here we go. How can the refurbishment of one building, albeit a very large Grade 1 listed building, take more than 6 decades to complete? The timescale is only 15 years off the time which elapsed since the last renovation completed in 1950. So if we imply that, by the time this work finishes, we'll have to start it all
Yep.
over again.
Yeah.
So yeah, I get the whole it's not as simple as moving people, but there's got to be
Mm.
a way. We've for me personally, we've got to see this as you need to move everything out of this to get it done as quickly as possible, unless you're forever going to be maintaining this building at a scale that doesn't do it justice.
Mm.
I'm talking, as a tourist attraction, as an actual working, functioning part of our country. Yeah, I don't know enough. There's a lot more knowledgeable people about these things than me, but I'd be all for doing a Manchester. Do it like the Northerners would. Shut it down. Get it done.
This is your pitch for King of the North, Andy Burnham, to charge down there and show him how it's done.
Yeah, yeah, on his white horse. Mind you, he might be knackered by the time he gets to London, so maybe just take the train.
Yeah, there is that. There is
Yeah,
that.
absolutely. Anyway, that's just my view, my own individual view. So, super quickly, let's wrap this up then. Takeaways. I think we know what yours might entail, but go.
Yeah, I think you've had mine, mate. It's yeah, meet people where they are, and there are some of us that will take on the quality side of things, but other sort of factors that we'd like to see within the sector, that we have a personal ethical drive to want to see these improvements, and that's great, and we should encourage anyone that has that. But we've also got to be mindful that some of our audience might not necessarily share our leanings in that respect. So where we can make the commercial case for quality, for inclusion, for whatever it is that we're passionate about, we should seek to do that, so that we are being more inclusive of people, regardless of where their starting point is on that particular topic. And I think, happily, there is a solid case for that. I think, to that point earlier, if quality equals better margins and better buildings ultimately, then yeah, that has to be a winner for everybody, regardless of your motivation. How about yourself? What's yours for this week?
Yeah, similar thread really, but kind of tagging on to the back of that one, and that's weirdly enough, I'll probably go back on what I've just said about the last headline, and that is preservation and restoration is fantastic, and it needs to be done to preserve our long and established history. But we need to consider the people in the buildings, like we spoke about on episode 103, and having that view on when we're creating buildings, think about the diverse nature of the individuals that are going to be using that. And from a parliamentary perspective, that certainly rings true from a completely different angle of what the story in episode 103 was talking about. But consider how that work is done, and to your point, consider how these policies and procedures are discussed and negotiated and signed off and agreed, and it isn't as simple as we'll just debate it in a room and then we'll agree or disagree. It's far more complex than that, and we need to consider those intricacies of our legal system as well. So I think it's giving consideration to people that are going to be the end users of whatever we are trying to create, um, and start with that.
Yeah.
Would be my takeaway.
No, absolutely. And to anyone listening to this in facilities management, I know somewhere that might have a 60-year contract coming up pretty shortly. So yeah, start getting those tender documents ready.
Yeah, on that note, we better sign off and let them get typing.
Cheers, Pete.